well, perhaps people with disabilities who may have challenges communicating with other people. Maybe we're just too busy, you might say, communicating with Hashem, and maybe we're closer to Hashem.
Welcome, everyone. This is Ordinary People with Extraordinary Stories. I'm Chana Weisberg, host of this podcast. Joining me today is Stephen Shore. Stephen Shore is an extraordinary human being who was born autistic, and the doctors told his parents that they should send him off to an institution. But now, Stephen is a professor at Adelphia University. He has written several books, including one called Autism for Dummies. He's a global ambassador for autism. He's an internationally renowned educator and consultant, and he's on the board of several autism-related organizations. Thank you so much for joining us, Stephen.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little about your story? Tell us what happened and what's your story like?
All right, sure. Well, taking it from the beginning, things were very typical for the first 18 months. Which then, like about 30% of us autistic individuals, I was struck with the regressive autism bomb. And I lost functional communication, had meltdowns, withdrew from the environment. And to brief, I became a very autistic little kid. There was so little known about autism in those days.
So did your parents know that you were autistic as soon as you were born? Is that?
No, because I was typically developing until 18 months.
Okay.
And then there was this regression, which I call the autism bomb. And after that struck, with the loss of functional communication, having meltdowns, withdrawing from the environment, my parents were totally mystified when I changed from being interactive and talking as much as an 18-month-old child would, to not liking to be touched and not communicating and seeming like I was perhaps in a different world. And it took my parents a year of searching to find a place for diagnosis.
Wow. Was that when the doctor said to put you away in an institution?
That's exactly it. So now it's 2.5. And
oh, wow.
Baruch Hashem, my parents, they, like so many parents that I see around the world in my travels in increasing numbers, they advocated on my behalf. And they convinced the school to take me in about a year. And it was during that year.
That was when you were, what, 2.5 years old?
Exactly, 2.5, yeah.
Oh, wow, that's early.
It's early.
Very early.
Early diagnosis, especially at that time, because there was so little known. So I was very lucky to get that early diagnosis. And knowledge is power. So my parents knew, well, we got to do something about this. And what my parents did, you might liken, in today's terminology, it would be considered as an intensive home-based early intervention program. And this was a program that involved a lot of music, movement, sensory integration, narration, imitation, child-centered interaction. However, in those days, even the concept of early intervention didn't even exist. So it was really just parents desperately trying to reach their kid.
That's amazing that they were able to think of that, at that stage. Yeah. So they sent you to school as well as doing this home intervention?
No, I was just at home.
Oh, you were just at home. So there was no school that you went to at that point.
Right. Yeah, there was no, today we have Head Start, we have early Head Start. That didn't exist. And I believe an important breakthrough was my parents initially tried to get me to imitate them. And imitation in that way is a time-honored teaching strategy. Let me show you how to do it. Okay, now you do it. But perhaps due to a difference in mirror neurons, it didn't work for me. So perhaps directed by Hashem, my parents imitated me. And when they did that, I became aware of them in my environment. And then they were able to move me along to a point where speech started to come back. And this is at age 4. And I believe
I find that so fascinating, because I guess anytime you really try to reach somebody, I guess you need to be at their stage or at their level. So the fact that they were imitating you rather than you imitating them, I mean, they were showing you that we're part of your world. And then you became open to hear what their world was about.
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And that's the
Wow.
first point. They met me where I was, which
Mm,
all good educators and therapists and people being with others do, and
mm-hmm,
then developed a trusting relationship
mm-hmm.
from which to move on from. So by age 4, I entered the school that initially rejected me. I got reevaluated. Instead of being considered as psychotic and ready for an institution, I got upgraded to neurotic. So things were looking much better.
Wow. And were they willing to take a neurotic student?
I guess they were. It was a special
They
school
were.
for
Uh-huh.
kids with disturbances. I believe that's what
Uh-huh.
they termed it in those days. And even
So you were talking at that stage, like talking regularly for a 4-year-old, or
beginning to,
beginning
yeah,
to communicate?
beginning to
Mm-hmm.
communicate with spoken word.
Mm-hmm.
And often we hear about the strengths and interests that autistic people have. And
Mm-hmm.
my first interest, well, I was found by my parents taking apart a watch with a sharp knife. I'd pop open the back, extract the motor, remove the gears, spin them around, and
Wow.
put it all back together again, and the watch still worked. And there
Wow.
weren't any
That's
pieces left
incredible.
over. Yeah.
And how old were you at that point where you were disassembling and assembling watches?
This was age 4.
4. Wow. Wow. That you would consider that gifted, no?
Yeah, yes. And that brings up you bring up another very important point, and that is a characteristic of autism that is not often discussed, is the widely varying skill set. And what
Mm-hmm.
that means is that the things we're good at, we can be incredibly good at. The things we're
Mm-hmm.
not so good at, well, we might need a lot of support.
Mm-hmm. And what generally are those things?
Well, it depends on the person. Often, things that autistic people are good at, people tend to think about computers and IT, but
Mm-hmm.
just about anything that the non-autistic population could be good at, so could the
Mm-hmm.
autistic person also be good at.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just to a much greater extreme.
Mm-hmm. So there aren't any specific challenges that autistic children and people usually face.
Well, there are challenges, yes, plenty of challenges. So if we look at,
No, but I mean, is it the same for all of them? Is there like a unique set of skills that they usually face, or is that very dependent on each individual?
well, generally, if we look at the definition of autism, and
Mm-hmm.
the medical model refers to it as being a deficit in, but I prefer to use a more social model and think of it as differences in social interaction. So interacting with others can be challenging. Communication,
Mm-hmm.
ranging from autistic people who don't speak and have not figured out a reliable means of communication yet, to those of us who maybe talk too much and monologue on topics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's also
Interesting.
sensory differences,
Mm-hmm.
which means we may perceive sensory input to a much greater degree than other people, and other sensory input that we barely feel at all. And
Mm-hmm.
an example of that is, well, many people may think of this hat as a fashion statement, and in many ways it
Mm-hmm.
is. And it's always good to support my university, Adelphi University, whenever possible.
Mm-hmm.
But really, it's an accommodation because for me, being under recessed lighting fixtures is probably like looking into a spotlight for most other
Mm-hmm.
people.
Wow, interesting. So the light is too intense.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And other differences, many autistic people have difficulty, for example, with facial recognition. So remembering people's faces. And for me, what that translates to as an adult, as a professor, is that it takes me all semester to begin to recognize my students.
Students, interesting.
Right.
Wow. Well, I have trouble remembering names, but faces I can remember.
All right. Well, between
Interesting.
us, we're all set.
You're right. Interesting. Wow. So let's go back to your story. I mean, so your parents found you the school at 4 years old, and then what happened?
So then speech is beginning to improve at age, probably about age 5, speech was pretty much on par with everybody else. And then
Mm-hmm.
at age 6, I entered regular school kindergarten, where I was a
Mm.
social and academic catastrophe.
In what way?
Well, socially, I didn't understand how to get along with my classmates. Um, Often, autistic people will stim on various things, either through motions, flapping hands, for
Mm.
example, or verbal stims. And I had this verbal stim of B. I just kept saying B, 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 B over and over.
Mm.
I just felt compelled to do it. And thinking back was probably not the best way to develop interactions with my
Mm.
classmates. So there was a lot of bullying
Mm-hmm.
in those days. Fortunately, school systems
Mm-hmm.
realize that bullying is not a developmental phase that people need to go through. And
Right.
academically, I was about a grade behind in most of my subjects.
Mm-hmm.
And I would spend most of my time in elementary school, going into the library, getting all the books on my favorite subjects. And it could have been anything ranging from music to electronics to volcanoes to aviation, space exploration, dinosaurs, a number of different interests. And I'd stack them on my desk, read them, take notes, copy diagrams. And
Mm.
then when I was done with them, I'd put them back and get a whole bunch of books on something else and
Mm.
repeat the process. And I remember thinking sometimes, is there more to school than reading my favorite books? Maybe doing math groups or something?
So you were getting a great education, just not the typical education of the what the school was wanting you to get, right?
Right. And I think what that translates to is that teachers didn't quite know how to reach me. But at the
Mm.
same time, since I wasn't a behavior problem, they just left
Mm.
me to my own devices. And it was probably for better rather than for
Mm.
worse.
Mm-hmm.
I remember
Interesting.
in third grade, I had a stack of astronomy books on my desk. And a teacher came up to my desk and told me I'd never learn how to do math. But somehow I figured out just enough math to teach statistics at the
Wow.
university level.
Right. Wow. Incredible. So we know so little, or at least we did know so little at that point in time of how to react to children with autism.
Yeah, well,
So you kind of you sailed through school. I'm sure the bullying part was not an easy part, but being bullied by those children.
no, certainly not. Um,
Right.
Middle and high school, you don't need to be autistic to have difficulties in middle and high school.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but for me, it was actually easier. And uh, the reason why is that one, I figured out that using words instead of sound effects or the letter B was a
Mm-hmm.
better way to interact with my classmates. And two,
Mm-hmm.
middle and high school is where you start seeing courses, clubs, and activities based on interest. Music being an interest, I joined the band.
Mm-hmm.
And now
So so you were more accepted once you joined the band.
yeah, exactly. Yes, I was more
Mm-hmm.
accepted. Musicians are considered to be a little bit strange, anyways. So it just all kind of worked, and there was a common interest. And then, being autistic and taking interest to extremes, I decided that I needed to learn how to play all the instruments.
Wow.
So I'd spend hours in the instrument closet, uh, disassembling instruments, learning about them, sometimes combining a number of instruments into these horrific contraptions that never should have seen the light of day. And while I didn't learn them all, I did get it up to about 15.
Wow. You were playing 15 instruments?
Yes.
Wow. What kind of instruments? Can you tell us some of them?
Yeah, sure. Mostly brass. I started
Mhm.
with piano lessons at age 6. And I think the
Mm.
most important thing I learned from those piano lessons was how not to teach an autistic person how to play the piano.
Piano.
And then was there from the trumpet to the trombone to the French horn, the tuba, other keyboards, the flute, the saxophone,
Wow.
string bass.
Wow. Very talented. Amazing. So you were very interested in music, and where did that take you?
Well, that brought me right to college because I
Hmm.
learned that one of the requirements for a degree at university was uh, you had to learn all the instruments. So
Hmm.
that's what I did. And I studied music for my bachelor's, master's, and all of my doctoral coursework. But after I finished the coursework, it was time for my comprehensives. But I was facing a challenge that was related to my being on the autism spectrum. And I, I went and got a, uh, a neuropsych exam just to see if that's what it was. And indeed, um, it was from being autistic as a child. And by the way, autistic children go up to be autistic adults who then become
Mm.
autistic seniors. So it's important.
So, so you don't outgrow autism. It's something that stays with you throughout life. You just adapt to society.
You adapt to society on your own autistic terms is probably the best way to put it.
Right.
So rather than
Right.
growing out of autism, you might say with a greater understanding of what it means to be autistic to the individual,
Mm.
the person, as my friend and colleague, almost Dr. Dina Gasner says, who's also autistic, you grow into being autistic
Mm.
with that
Mm.
understanding.
Mm.
So then,
Wow.
with these difficulties, um, I had a decision. Should I continue with music, maybe involve the ADA and lawyers, Americans with Disabilities Act, that is, and lawyers, or should I study something else, which I also find very interesting? And that something else was special education. So I defected to the School of Education and
Mm.
got my doctorate in special education.
Wow. With special education, and you specialized in autism or just special education in general?
Specialized in autism. So you
Uh-huh.
could think of it as special education with a focus on autism. That's where all my research was focused on. And at that time, I was writing books on autism, starting with my autobiography, Beyond the Wall, Personal Experiences with Autism and Asperger's Syndrome, another book on self advocacy. And I got a little bit tied up writing my books and also speaking at conferences, traveling around the world. And I just remember my advisor saying, okay, enough of the books, just finish your dissertation and then you can go back to writing your books. So that's what I did.
Wow. Wow. Are you motivated to correct what things you experienced that were not good for you? In other words, are you trying to correct society from doing the things that you saw were so unuseful
Yes, I,
in your education?
yeah. And that is one of my, you might say, driving forces is to use my experiences, both personal experiences being autistic, combined with practical, which is working with autistic children and adults, with my academic and research experience. And as I was
Mm.
thinking about putting these three together, it reminds me of the concept of tikkun olam,
Mm.
which is repairing the world. And I think to what the Rebbe had to say about what we're here to do. And we're here to partner with Hashem to make the world a better place. And in doing so, you might say the fixing the world, my focus is not fixing autistic people because we don't need to be fixed, but fixing the environment and fixing and developing greater understanding of what autism is in society. So it means turning away from the medical model of how we consider autism. The medical model is there's something wrong with you and we need to fix it. And that's great when you have a medical problem, such as maybe you have a heart problem and you really do need to fix that, or you have an appendicitis and yeah, you better take care of that too. But when we're talking about people, it's, we're put here by Hashem. Hashem doesn't make mistakes. We're here for a reason. And part of that reason may very well just be to help make the world a better place and promote understanding of how we can make adjustments so that autistic and otherwise neurodivergent individuals, people with disabilities, can be more successful. So, with making these adjustments and modifications. And in doing so, it often makes life better for everybody else as well. And one example is access ramps to buildings. Buildings now have to be made accessible, which includes access ramps. And I see many people who have no mobility impairments at all preferring to use an access ramp instead of the stairs. And I do too.
Right.
And
true.
People wheeling heavy objects appreciate being able to go in the front of the building instead of around to the back. So this adjustment or modification, which was initially thought to be this expensive change or adaptation for just a few people, ends up benefiting everybody else as well.
Right. You mentioned the Rebbe. How do you see the Rebbe's attitude towards autism or special needs in general as being, I mean, it was revolutionary at the time. Do you see that? Do you see it in such a way?
Yeah, I do. And I think it's amazing, during the time when the Rebbe would talk about or write about people with differences, people with disabilities, and just the idea that, well, perhaps people with disabilities who may have challenges communicating with other people, maybe we're just too busy, you might say, communicating with Hashem, and maybe we're closer to Hashem than most other people. And I thought that was a beautiful way of looking at it. The Rebbe suggesting to the man who came to him about his autistic son, and the Rebbe suggesting to put a pushka in his room and to have the son remind people to give charity, and that's a good thing too.
Right. That's meeting the child where they're at, right, and showing them in a spiritual way what they can be doing to contribute to the world.
Yeah, exactly. And even just last Saturday, I was talking with Rabbi Pearl of Chabad Mineola. That's my shul. And
well, after you tell, no, I want to hear how you got to that shul.
Okay.
Were you always religious, and how did you get to Chabad?
Oh, okay.
But you could tell us that story first.
Okay, how I get there? Okay, so doing it in order. So here I am at Adelphi University in New York, and it's getting to be the high holiday seasons, and I think I have a real yearning to go to shul. So I looked up what's the closest shul. Okay, it's over here. It's about a mile away, maybe not even. And I'm going to go in there. And so I walk into the shul. Haven't been in a shul in a long time, maybe 10 or 20 years. So tentatively open the door. The place is packed, and standing room only. Rabbi Pearl, who I didn't even know his name at that point, he spies this newcomer, and he motions, come down, sit in the cheap seats, which means the seats in the front.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
and I found him to be very welcoming and very warm, and he'd invite me over for Shabbat dinners every night. And I remember during those early days, uh, riding my bicycle uh, to the temple, and I saw Rabbi
Mhm.
Pearl walking. Oh, hello, Rabbi Pearl. And he said, are you going to shul? I said, yeah, you bet I am. And then he has a great sense of humor, and he said something like, well, you shouldn't trust these guys with long beards.
Right. Wow. Wow. So you found him very welcoming, and I guess that's how you got involved with Chabad?
Exactly, very welcoming and inclusive. And
Mm.
in my travels, often I'd be traveling in different states or different countries
Yeah, you
over
travel
Shabbat,
extensively. Right.
extensively, a different country about once a month.
Oh, wow. Wow. Giving your lectures and your educational programs?
Exactly. Uh,
Mhm.
and so the first thing I do once I accept a place to speak is, okay, where's the closest Chabad?
Mm.
And often there's one close by, sometimes it's even next door, which I find very surprising and great. And I find everybody to be welcoming. It's like one big happy family.
Mm.
And
Wow.
and
Interesting.
yeah. So speaking of promoting understanding, I
Mhm.
was just talking with Rabbi Pearl last Shabbat, and he told me that he was very grateful that I've come to his shul because he's learned from me to be much more sensitive to people with disabilities and to make the shul even more inclusive than it already was.
Wow.
And
And in what way? Like how did he do that?
he did that by one is explaining even more uh, during the services, why he is doing what he's doing, having signs with words
Mhm.
and pictures,
Mm.
sometimes having special events for people with
Mhm.
disabilities,
Mhm.
and I find that's great. And I've also
Amazing.
and I found that Rabbi Yankel Lipsker, who is the rabbi of Chabad on campus at Adelphi University,
Mhm.
um, he often consults me when he's thinking about making his home more inclusive for people with
Mhm.
disabilities. For example, he consulted me about preferred type of lighting to use for autistic individuals, which brings up another point: the inclusive nature of Chabad. And what I noticed uh, when I became involved with Chabad on campus here at Adelphi, of which now I'm their faculty advisor, is
Mm.
that there were a lot of autistic people there, a lot of people with disabilities, and much more than what you'd find in the general population. And I think that
Wow.
that speaks to the nice, homey, inclusive environment that
Mm.
Chabad provides.
Mhm. Wow, that's incredible. That is really incredible. Stephen, when you look at your accomplishments, what are you most proud of?
I'm most proud at being able to partner with Hashem in developing greater understanding of autistic individuals, people who have other neurodivergent conditions, and disabilities. And I find it a great honor to be able to do so as I work towards my mission of making fulfilling and productive lives for autistic and people who just are different. Uh,
Right.
Making success, fulfilling and productive lives the rule rather than the exception.
Wow, that's beautiful. What would you like us, listeners, to know about people with special needs, about ways that we can be perhaps more sensitive or things that we can do in a practical level in our own lives to help people, to make people feel more inclusive?
Well, I think the best thing that can be done, you can do, is for people to get to know people with disabilities, people with differences, autistic individuals. If you want to learn more about autism, get to know autistic people. If you're a parent and you have a child who's been diagnosed with, and we'll just fill in the blank, it could be autism, it could be cerebral palsy, whatever it could be, find other people with the same experiences, with similar experiences. There's parent support groups out there. You can go online and find people who have these conditions, communicating and setting up communities of these people. And we're happy to share with others as to who we are and how we can all make the world a better place.
Wow, incredible. Really, that's important for all of us to be doing. I'm wondering, like, what in your journey, you weren't always religious. What has made you become, what made you like inspired, other than the inclusivity? What inspires you most about Judaism, other than the inclusivity that you found in Chabad? That was the environment, but is there something in Judaism or in Hasidus or in Lubavitch or Chabad that has really impressed you?
I think the community and the openness of Chabad, and sometimes people who people who are religious have a reputation of being closed off or turned in, and if you haven't been part of the community for at least since your great great grandfather has been here, then
Right.
you're an outsider. But you're always welcome whenever I step over a threshold of a Chabad house. It could be in China, it could be in India, it could be in Peru, wherever it is. I always feel welcome. And there's this common interest in community and making the world a better place.
Wow. Do you have any interesting stories you can share with us about some of your experiences or travels to different places with Chabad?
Yes, I do. And thinking about Chabad of Pudong in Shanghai.
Oh,
Yeah, so way out there, Rabbi Greenberg is out there. I know there's a number of brothers, all with the last name of Greenberg, and I think I've been
right.
to 3 of their Chabads, one in Texas, one somewhere else, which I don't remember, and the one in Shanghai. And so when I came, the rabbi was interested in what brought me here and what I was doing. And he asked if I would uh, share a little bit of my experiences uh, at Shabbat on Friday night as we went around the table talking about our experiences. And so I did, and everybody seemed to be very interested. They asked good questions. And then he asked me if I'd come back on Saturday and talk some more. And thus I did, and that was very rewarding. And I found that to be the case in several places. Chabad in Stockholm, a similar thing type happened. And often when they find out what brings me to visit uh, their community, people seem to be very interested. And I find that interest very encouraging.
It is very encouraging, for sure. I guess that's a far cry from what you've experienced when you were a child with the bullying going on. How do you feel parents should react to bullying when their children are going through that? Whether they're special needs and they're being bullied because of that or for any other reason?
Well, I think the most important thing is that parents establish themselves as a safe person for their child to talk to and to share experiences with. And that's something that my parents did very well at. And so if the child has that and then can tell their parents uh, the challenges with bullying, or it could be anything, school, inside school, outside of school, and they won't be judged for bringing these things to the parent, but it's more a matter of let's work together to resolve the problem. And when it comes to bullying in particular, it's the responsibility of the adults to identify and address the issue. So back when I was being bullied, the conventional wisdom was ignore the bully, stick up for the bully, to the bully, stick up for yourself. And I've always wondered, why would we ask someone who has the least amount of power in a given relationship, bully and bullied, to do most of the work?
Right.
And
right.
So it's up to the school system to identify and eradicate bullying.
Right, right. Wow. It sounds like your parents were amazing advocates for you, from such a young age, and almost like they intuitively understood what to do when there wasn't a lot of knowledge available on these things.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And intuition, we can ask, where does intuition come from? Does it come from Hashem? And people who have this type of intuition, I often find are the best at being people with differences. And so an example may be, I've spent a lot of time thinking about and developing materials to give piano lessons to autistic children. And so I have a special way that I go about doing it and developing the materials. And I'm always excited when I hear a story about an autistic kid having a piano teacher who knows nothing about autism, but just accepts the child for who they are, and they work together, and they have these amazing lessons.
Wow. So it sounds like, through your autism, through your disability, through your difficulty and challenge, you've really became the person that you've become. It almost has helped you to be who you've become and propelled you. Do you ever wish that you weren't autistic?
No. If I could take a pill or a potion, or if a prayer existed that would make me non-autistic, I wouldn't do it, because I like the way I am. I like the way I perceive the environment. I like my highly focused interests. And I think you're exactly right. Rather than struggling against autism and working against it, trying to be rid of autistic characteristics so that I could be a productive adult, instead, autism has made me the man who I needed to be.
Amazing. Really amazing. We're gonna conclude, but before we end, is there something that you're looking forward to do in the future? I mean, you've accomplished so many things with your books, with your lectures, with your students, with so many areas that you excel in. Is there anything that you're looking to accomplish in the future?
Yeah, well, in addition to continuing with my presentations on consultations around the world, one area I look towards focusing on is making college more accessible, making higher education more accessible for autistic individuals, others who are neurodivergent, and people with disabilities. So making college more inclusive. And a second thing that I'm involved in and that I look forward to continuing work is involving autistic people in research. And what we found through some research that I've done in partnership with other colleagues is we've learned things that we would have no way of finding out, except for the fact that, one, we consulted autistic people when we asked questions, and then two, we've involved autistic people to meaningfully and authentically participate in our research.
Interesting. Wow. Very interesting. Fascinating. Stephan Shore, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh,
We
it's my
really
honor.
appreciate your time and your wisdom and your direction for us and how we can all work towards making a better world, a world where people feel more included and more treated like God's creation, like God's precious creations. So I think that's a beautiful message that you give to the world.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
There were so many parts to that interview with Stephen Shore that I really enjoyed and that really resonated with me, in terms of, first of all, his parents and how incredible they were to really at that time understand what he needed. And it really shows the role of parents, how they didn't know what to do, but they were so intuitive to his needs and trying to find the solution no matter what. I think that parents' love, you can just feel their love in how they just kept searching until they found a solution. I was blown away by Stefan's incredible accomplishments. No matter what his disabilities were, no matter what his autism, how it was preventing him from accomplishing, he still reached, kept on trying and had goals set for himself and reached incredible things to today. What he is actually doing for the autistic community and for the inclusion community is really quite awe-inspiring. I think the moment that really stood out for me was when I asked Stefan if he would ever change what he was to not be autistic, if he could push some magical button. And he unequivocally said, no, this is who has made him into who he is. And it just makes you think that, we all have things about ourselves, qualities, characteristics, struggles, challenges that we face, whether it be circumstances or whether it be internal, that we have in our lives. And if we can just look at it with that positive prism that Stefan gives us of this is really how we can become the people that we're meant to be, to lead a life that creates a better environment for us and for those around us. I think that really is a powerful message for all of us. If you enjoy watching these interviews, I hope that you are subscribed, whether it is on Chabad.org, follow Chabad.org/extraordinary, or if it is on Spotify, we're available on Spotify, on Apple, and any podcast platforms. Please leave us a comment, leave us a like. It means so much to us. I read, of course, every comment that comes in, and it really helps us to get these videos out there and to get the message out there. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you enjoy, and I hope you continue coming back for more. Thank you.